Hello, today I'm going to be sharing with you the art of Japanese tea ceremonies. I'm going to be going over some of the background, the rules, and the steps of this ceremony. At first, you might think that this tea ceremony is just a gathering of people drinking tea, but it's actually much more intricate and beautiful than that. So, first, let's go over some background. These tea ceremonies were first held in China, and later on in around the 1100s, they were reached to Japan. And monks would use this tea ceremony to help stay awake and to use as like kind of a Zen practice. As time went on, this tradition was passed from monks to samurais and is now welcome for everybody to partake in. There are two main types of these ceremonies. The first one would be a more informal one and is usually a bit shorter. And then the second one would be a more formal one, which could take up to 4 hours. An interesting and quite beautiful thing about these tea ceremonies is that each tea ceremony is uniquely different based on the utensils and decorations the host decided to choose and the season. Usually these tea ceremonies are held with a maximum of 5 guests. But that's not always the case because sometimes in cases of more casual ceremonies, there could be up to 100 people involved. These tea ceremonies are usually used to help purify and kind of cleanse the soul from the stress of their normal, everyday, busy lives. Now that I told you a little bit about the background of these ceremonies, I'm going to go over some rules involved, and there are quite a few. So the first rule is that the guests may not arrive too late or too early, as it will interrupt the host process. Throughout the ceremony, there is very little verbal communication. And the little bit that is allowed to be spoken must be spoken at the right time and must be only talked about seasons, the decorations, utensils, and of course the tea. Guests must bow and be respectful toward the host and other guests, causing as little distraction as possible. Hosts must be trained to know how to properly do these ceremonies. Now that we know some basic rules of the Japanese tea ceremonies, what do these ceremonies actually include, and what are some of the steps? So the first step would be that these tea ceremonies usually begin at around noon. To begin the tea ceremony, guests will usually wait in a waiting room and be served hot water until the rest of the guests arrive. Once all the guests arrive, they walk through a beautiful garden, which acts as a purification process, and this transition represents moving from everyday life into a place of tranquility and calmness. Once they are done walking through the garden, they are met and welcomed by the host in the second waiting room. All guests should remain quiet and bow to the host. Before entering the tea room, the guests must purify their hands and their mouths with water. As the guests enter the tea room, they are welcome to admire the scroll and the pottery that the guest has chosen to display. If the ceremony is the longer, more formal one, the guests are now served a sort of dinner. And some things it would include would be appetizers, sashimi, cooked dishes, rice, and dessert. And some examples of these dishes would be miso soup, cooked vegetables, fish, sake, and rice. If the tea ceremony is held in spring or summer, now the charcoal is burned to warm the water for the tea. Now the guests are offered the main sweet, which is usually a very sweet dessert to help cut the bitterness of the tea, as the tea is not sweetened. And usually this is changed throughout the seasons and is usually very brightly colored and intricately designed. Guests are brought back outside in the waiting area while the host prepares for the rest of the ceremony. Once the guest is done changing the scroll to now a flower decoration that is usually placed to look like it was growing in nature, the host will ring a gong to let the guests know it is time to enter the tea room once again. The guests must once again purify their hands and their mouths before entering the tea room with water. And now it is time to prepare and drink the tea. The host will pour hot water into a bowl and mix some matcha powder to make matcha tea. The host will carefully mix the tea with a whisk-like utensil, and guests are supposed to be quiet while the host works and just enjoy the process. Now the tea is served, and guests must first turn the bowl 90 degrees twice to ensure sanitation and to follow protocol. Now the guests, once they've done drinking the tea, they can speak about the utensils, decorations, the seasons, and the tea. Once the tea ceremony is finished, the host dismisses the guests from the tea house and watches the guests until they leave, until they can no longer see the guests anymore. Tea ceremonies in Japan are a very important part of Japanese culture and have been celebrated by tourists regularly. These tea ceremonies are incredibly beautiful and full of symbolism, and was very fun to learn about in preparation of this speech. I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit about Japanese tea ceremonies and leave with a deeper appreciation and understanding of Japanese culture. Thank you.